So as always, the Providence Police Department is committed to transparency in an open forum. We'll conduct a comprehensive review of this situation. But as you can see, this event on Tuesday night lasted about 3 hours in total. The Providence Police, from their time of arrival, were called to the scene, and right up till the end of that 3 hours, there were several attempts during the course of that time to de-escalate, to diffuse, and we spent a lot of time there. At one point, every patrol car and unmarked unit that was free was at the scene. They were called to the scene. So I'll try as best I can to run through a timeline. I wasn't going to do this, but I think to put it in its true context, I will as quick as I can. So at 6:06 p.m., there's a call, complainant calls and says, the police need to get to Sayles Street, it's out of control. 1 minute later, there's another call, then there's a third call, and the second call is about a woman who claims a large group of people are trying to engage her 7-year-old daughter into a physical altercation. One car is dispatched to the scene. So prior to that, the hydrants were open. It was a very hot, humid night. Tensions were high. There were some disputes ongoing between two houses on Sayles Street, 260 and 264. They had already been in verbal disagreement, and then at some point, someone had threatened a 7-year-old child, and some adults got involved in that threat, and the parents and adults of that child got involved. That's what the initial responding officer had been dealing with. He responds to the scene and does a very good job alone. There's approximately 50 people in the surrounding area. He comes over channel 4 and immediately calls for the Providence Water Supply and Providence Fire Department to shut off the hydrant, and he diffuses and calms down the situation as best he can. That's at about 6:30, 6:40 p.m. At about 7 o'clock, Sergeant Paola informs dispatch that cars are clearing and because other cars have responded, the situation is in hand. So 1 hour later, the situation appeared to be in hand. Just 2 districts of patrol cars on the scene. About a half hour later, we're called again to respond to 264 Sayles, and at that point, the sergeant responds as well, and he says we may need more cars to the scene. One of the officers who responds on scene comes over the radio and indicates there are several people fighting in the street, of which he attempts to break up those fights and move people back to their respective houses and separate them because they were angry. There was a lot of agitation. There was a lot of tension between the two houses. You can see on the videos we put out so far, there were several attempts to get them back to their respective houses. At such point, there was one of the females from one of the houses walked in the middle of the street and walked towards the other house and threw a bottle to incite that group. And then that enraged a younger female from 264, I believe it was who was upset because her mother was jumped. The first group had called in several other people and they jumped her mother. And she was hearing that story just around the same time that this woman from that other house came in the middle of the street, threw a bottle up in the air and smashed the bottle. That young female ran to that house. Officers quickly, and you may have seen this in the video, responded over there just to diffuse that situation. They grabbed her. That was going to be a bad situation. They grabbed her. She was placed under arrest. That's why she ran towards that house, because her mother had been jumped, and then the family had incited by throwing the bottle. Captain responds to the scene. At some point, we moved in to make a couple more arrests. Someone's emergency button went off, and the dispatcher at 8 o'clock hits the tone, every car in the city to respond. So 2 hours later, every car in the city is responding to the scene. One of the officers you may have seen lost his body-worn camera, and then while there were several officers on scene, he moved over to retrieve his body-worn camera and someone was standing on top of his body-worn camera. He pushed that person to retrieve his body-worn camera, got his camera back. Again, there's several attempts for each group to get at each other, both verbally. There may have been some communication by social media. We'll meet you in the backyard to fight, which our officers had learned of. So we had quite a bit going on in a chaotic scene with fights, or at least verbal disputes going back and forth to incite fights, and also one in the backyard. We ended up making 5 arrests on scene. There were 2 juveniles males, 2 juvenile females, 1 adult. There were 3 separate calls from citizens for police to respond that documented. The fire department responded at 8:30 to assist, and we had kind of cleared the scene. There was only 1 car on scene, and again, the fire department had called dispatch for further assistance from the police department. So we had to respond back there, and it took us another half hour to restore order. So in total, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., we finally cleared the call at 8:58 p.m. Pepper spray was used during that incident, and it was used according to policy. When verbal direction, hands-on technique, control holds by officers have failed or are likely to fail, it's authorized to use OC. When the officer could reasonably use an impact weapon as a striking tool, it's authorized to use. When OC would be an effective, safe, and quick form to de-escalate resistance. What happens oftentimes is when we move in to make an arrest, we try to extract an individual from the group, and then the crowd may encroach and try to interfere in that arrest. We've seen that often. Like, we're a busy police department. Just last week, we had a situation like that occur, and a female officer ends up with a broken nose and a broken orbital socket. We have to, as best we can, try to create distance and keep, for the safety of everyone, the people on the scene and the police officers, and that's why OC was used. I just figured I'd put that out there. You saw it on the video. OC was clearly used, and within policy, to create distance and prevent them from encroaching when there's an arrest to be made. Those are, that's the timeline, those are the facts.